Welcome back, everyone, to Nirvana Stage. This is me, Ostea. You can call me Tea, and we are continuing our program. We have Duane Newman joining us all the way from United States. Now,
Hello.
this is what I know about Duane. Duane is co-founder of Alien Art Technologies, where he focuses on creating apps targeting mobile devices, modern desktops, and the Internet of Things. As a Microsoft MVP and technology enthusiast with a passion for good software, he strives to bring solutions that improve or eliminate costly duplication and repetitive processes so more important things can be done. He enjoys teaching others and speaking at conferences on topics ranging from DevOps to Xamarin. When not behind a computer screen, he can be found sharing his love of scuba and all things underwater with new divers at the pool or through his underwater videos and photos at dldadventures.com. Now let's hear unit testing with ease. Word to you, Duane.
All right, thanks, Tia. So today we're going to talk about unit testing apps with ease. And really, we kind of want to talk about, just like my subtitle says there, skipping the ceremony and getting straight to testing. So if you've been doing unit testing, you know there's a lot of kind of setup that might be involved in getting your testing going and everything. So kind of want to talk around some of those things. And I want to talk about some of the common unit testing challenges that we run into. And you see they all kind of run together here, with testing dependencies, injecting dependencies, and instantiating objects, all kind of a similar area of your tests and stuff that you got to work with. And so I kind of want to start talking about testable dependencies. And really, this is about being able to control the behavior of the things we're testing. So, being able to create a scenario that makes our tests work, that allows us to, go through all the different parts of our code that we might have. So it's not just the happy path, but also failure modes and other situations like that. And then the next part I want to talk about is going to be injecting those dependencies, getting those things that we've created into our code, managing it in a way so that we can actually work through that and be able to use those pieces to do the tests. And this is kind of often some of the harder parts. And then I also want to talk about instantiating objects. So this is going to be, how do we new up the things we're testing? How do we get the things that we're wanting to, that they depend on, all the dependencies we've just spent time figuring out how to make testable? And how do we get this all together in one piece? And really, we want to try to, do the minimal pieces we have to at this step. And we'll talk more about how to leverage the pieces that we use, like dependency injection, in our normal software development in our testing. So first, let's talk about dependencies. And dependencies and the ability to do things in a way that you can test are useful in a couple ways, because sometimes you might be writing code to work on parts of your application that you don't have the actual dependency for. Maybe someone else is doing that work and things. So one, it's not very easy to actually have those things to use as your dependency, but also it's very hard to control the real world. When you get some service that uses a repository layer that maybe someone else is building or even that you've built, it's very hard to control that repository to do what you want to do so that you can actually test that your service is making the functions that you want to do. And when we do testing, we really want to be able to focus on testing one thing, not all the things, right? If I'm testing my view model, that's what I want to test. I want my unit test to make sure that my view model works and that it does what it should do, not that my API layer is working or that my repositories are returning data or any of these other pieces of my app. I don't want to have to rely on them. I don't want to be controlled by a failure in one of those pieces inside my test for this. I want to make sure that this one piece works the way that I expect it to work. And so to get started with that, we want to do mocking. So I've settled on using mock. There's a couple other out there that you can use. I like mock. It's very easy to use. It provides a way to fluent syntax allows you to go through and set everything up, and it's really pretty useful. You can do all the normal things that you want to do. You can mock an interface or a concrete class. So you can give it a class, and as long as it's not sealed, you can be able to mock that. And you can do all your configuration on it, get it all set up, make it respond to the way you want it to make, you want to respond, and then be able to test against that. And the things I like about it is some of these other bullet points here. The fact that refactoring works with it because it's you're interacting with your object just like it's the real object. And even from the test setup, there's no magic strings out there with like method names or things like that. You're actually using Lambda expressions to go in and actually interact with the different properties on it. And you can modify it as you go. One limitation of using mock is that you can't mock static methods. And this is just kind of hard in general, but you might think of like extension methods as a really common way that we would be doing static methods out there that you might have to work with. So when it comes to that, you can mock the things that the extension methods work on. So you can control the data that maybe goes into that, but you can't actually mock the method itself. So you got to really be careful about how you do that. And that also comes not just down to the mocking of the interaction, but also to doing things like tracking the verification process of whether things were called in your code. So I want to look a little bit at how mock works. And mock is pretty straightforward here. So I'm just going to walk through this code. The first line there, we're actually creating a new mock object from the mock library that's representing an iCart repository. And so the instance of mock by itself doesn't represent an iCart repository. It's the mock object lets you configure it. And then all we're doing is we're doing a little bit of setup here, creating a cart that we're going to work with. And then we get down here, we're doing the mock setup routines. And my laser pointer on here. So here, we're just going to go through, do a setup. And you can see that as we do this, we're coming in, we're telling it, this is the object we're mocking out, our repository. And we're telling it that we want to set up the call to clear all products. And this particular call doesn't have any properties being passed in, so it's a real simple version of it here. But we're just telling it we want to mock out what happens to this, and we're going to come in and tell it that when it happens, we want to return this value. And we're actually able to, as you can see, use a Lambda expression here. You could put a static value in here. You could put a variable that's the right type, return it out, or you can do what I'm doing here and create a method where it comes in and actually you can do actual code and everything. So if you need to keep track some states in your mock, for instance, like in this particular case, I want to make sure that maybe the call that happens after this has the right stuff in it. So I'm going to clear the cart, and then I'm going to return my cart back out of this like it expects. And then I'm also doing a setup for the get products, which just says, hey, return the task because it's async, return the result of this of the cart back out. So, very, very straightforward configuration and setup there. And, like I said, you could either return from a method like that that's actually evaluating it, or you can return, direct variables or even hard-coded values back out of that. Very flexible. It's a little bit more involved when you have some properties that you want to pass into it, but it's actually pretty capable. Here we're going to mock out the update product method. And if we look at that, you see this first parameter here is this it object, and that's a built-in type that's in the mock library. And what it allows you to do is control how it matches values against it. So in this case, we can tell it that for update product, we want to match when the value is any cart product. So any cart product that's passed in for this first parameter on here is going to match on this setup. And when that happens, we're going to come down here, we're going to do return, and we're going to just do some really simple logic here. We're going to move everything from our cart or that matches this item we passed in, and then we're going to add the new one back in and then return that. Just because we're just doing some simple testing, we're not concerned that all the magic underneath this in the real cart product is happening. We just need it to work right so that maybe our test flow that we're testing has the expected results in it. And then you can see here I'm setting up update product again. But in this case, I am actually using a Lambda expression here to track a specific item. So both of these can work together. And what's going to happen is this is going to create a more exclusive match on it. And it's going to come in, and when I match against an ID of 2, that's going to do something different. So in this case, it's just going to return the product back out of it instead of the whole thing. So you can make decisions like that as you're going through it. Very robust in some of the capabilities. The final thing that we typically want to do when we're using the mock object to do testing is actually make sure that something was called. And this is the most common thing I use a lot out there. Yeah, obviously I mock the setup on routines so that they return the values I need for my test to complete. But a lot of times I want to make sure, not so much that I got the right value back, but did this thing actually get called by my code? Did the part of the code I expected to have happen get there? Did it do what I expected to do? So in this case, I want to make sure that I'm verifying this is my dialog service. I want to verify that the display alert async method was called from my code when we came at an error condition. So the code would have called this up when we either weren't able to add the item to the cart for some reason, didn't get the right result back. And I want to make sure that it happened one time. You could also do the inverse of this on a routine that works properly. Come in and make sure that, hey, this actually never happened instead of happening once. And that's kind of the general rundown of how the mocking works in there. And so it's got a quick little demo just to show some of that. I've got some stuff that look very familiar to what we were just looking at over here. I just want to kind of show some of the setup that's out there. So let's look at my questions that are over here. Yeah, and about whether the async returning different values, it really matters just about your particular test case and everything to make it do what you want to do. More just showing what you can do with it here. So take a look at this code. You can see I've got a interface up here. It's nothing really special to it. It's just kind of thrown together to have something to test against. And I've got a method here that's going to run through and create some mocks. And doing all the things I talked about the setup here. Some of the things I want to show off is we're going to clear all the items. I'm going to update an item into it, ID one, the quantity one. I'm going to get my items back out and then clear them again, update another item, get the items and clear it. I'm doing this several times just so I can show some of the functionality. So initially, I have it set here with everything in my mock kind of doing what you would expect the mock to do. So you come through here and you've got the results that we expect to see in a normal test. So I might be doing actual fact checking on my test here, asserting that I got the things back I expected to get out of this. Obviously I'm just showing how the mock works here, but we can do a couple things. So I've got this set up for the update item. Find it up here. So update item is doing what you would expect a normal one to do, right? So it's just adding the item in my cart here, making sure it's current in there. But what I want to do is I want to change the behavior just at this point moving forward. So I'm going to uncomment this. And what I want is that when I'm working with item 2, I want it to not work right. I want it to do different stuff. So instead of actually updating the item I'm actually not updating it or doing anything. So if we look through here, our update item 2, we actually had some results coming out of it with a new item that we had from the clear. And if I run it now, it's not getting put in there. So we could alter that return value so that we can create a test condition that we can check against to see that our code's operating properly. Not that this code, the update item worked right, but that our code that uses update item responded properly. So this might be where I would have my test in there that I showed a second ago with the display alert async not working. So this might be where I would check and make sure that that showed up because my cart didn't change the way I expected it to change. Comment that back out. And then other things also can change what clear all items does. So up here, we're configuring clear all items to actually clear my cart object and then returning it. And down here, we're actually not clearing it at all. So we can test conditions like that our clear methods, didn't work. And this replaced all the calls for that. It's not just for this one ID. Remember, this update items was specifically interacting with ID of 2 calling in. So if we'd added an ID of 1 back in, it would still work as we expected it to. But in this particular case, it's coming back and it'll affect all future calls to clear all items. So it's nice you're able to replace entirely what's being done in there. And I'll kind of go over why this is important a little bit later as we move through into some of the other parts of the talk here, but just worth noting that you can do that. So there are some things that mock is not great at doing. That includes working with APIs. So if you're maybe building a API layer to interact with your actual service and everything, and you want to test that it's doing the right things, that it's passing the right properties and converting data coming back properly and all those kinds of things, that's a little harder to do. So you could do it a couple of ways. You could inject a custom HTTP client in it and make it do what you want, or use a fake HTTP handler, which you could either create yourself, or you could actually use Richard's mock HTTP NuGet packages out there, which is actually really great for doing this. It's pretty capable. It's something I usually go a little bit more in depth on, but I don't have the time today to go over it. But I want to point out that it's out there. It's something I use a lot when I'm testing API code because I can set up all my endpoints and control the responses that come back out so that I can make sure that all those processes are working right. And then other things to consider is when you're working with core .NET functionality, like file IO and other things in there. So, you might want to consider how you wrap those things up and maybe not doing, directly file.opens, but maybe using a, file service or something like that allows you to do those openings that you could actually, instead of returning, just doing the actual open and returning the file stream from it, maybe you return an in-memory stream that you can control the contents of and or validate that the contents written to it were what you expected in those cases. So, getting away from anything on disk, make your tests run faster and also, more reliably without need for actual local access. And then the other common thing that I end up having to do something different for is going to be database access, especially in repositories when you're working with those. And if you're using any framework, you can use the in-memory provider. There's other solutions for other systems out there, but taking a look at those pieces, and those are some considerations you'll have to kind of think about when it comes down to mocking and considering what can I mock and what can I not mock out of it. So that's mocking and object initialization. Just take a quick look over here at the questions and stuff, see if there's anything on that before I move on to the next part. Okay, so move on to the next section here. And this kind of wraps together both of the final pieces a little bit when it comes to dependencies and working with dependencies. And now that I've got these mocked objects and getting them into my code, getting the things I want to test back out to be able to call methods on them, and trying to figure out how to do this without having new calls all over in my code. And so I kind of want to take you through my journey when I got into actually doing, unit testing and trying to make it a normal part of my development process. A few years ago, I had been getting really excited kind of about TDD and actually using unit testing in general after watching a few other speakers talk about it. And I had a project come up doing some Xamarin Forms work that seemed like the perfect spot to really kind of focus on this. And so I kind of want to take you through what happened as I was doing this. So I knew I wanted to create tests, and I got started, writing my tests using mock. I had seen that. I knew I didn't want to actually have to test, the full stack of everything. I wanted to test the actual functionality of my, in this case, my view model, not all my services. And so I kind of started putting my tests together and started writing them like this. I was creating my different services that my object needed to be able to come in here. I created my nav service off the navigation service interface. Got my event aggregator in here. Knew I needed to do some setup on it to make sure that certain things happened and that the right stuff came out. And then I would create my view model, pass the objects in. This, by the way, this is how you get the actual object, the dot object out of mock. So I passed my instances into it that were mocked, run my test, check my conditions, and work through it. And this was working really good, except for that, every test seemed to kind of start like this. And it worked out great when I was creating the tests because I was lazy. I would just copy paste into a new test and put those pieces in, change my setup code however it needed to be. If I had, common setup routines, I was already kind of making some functions to call that would do all the common setup for something. But it's kind of ended up starting to do this over and over and over again. And I'm like my intro said, I'm not a big fan of duplication. I like to try to fix that stuff when I can. And so what I ended up doing was thinking about all these things I was doing and creating methods to wrap up all that creation. So I wasn't writing all this code over and over, and just kind of simplifying it down so that all my setup was in one spot, so I could still get my mock object back, so I could do things I needed to do to it, do verifications, stuff like that, but did all my setup and everything in there, so it was all kind of wrapped up for me. And this was better. And so I did this. I added a new dependency. You can see it's file viewer service, right? So I had something new, and that's kind of why I took the advantage to do this, because I had to go back and touch all these tests anyway. So I refactored these pieces in, and my code got a little bit better. So it started looking a little more like this. So all I was doing was, getting my default one that I needed, and then I would instantiate my view model, pass my objects into it, load it, and I could still have the reference I needed to do it. You notice these other ones, I'm just calling the method and passing the object straight in because I didn't care about it, didn't need to use it, like the event aggregator. And so that was kind of what I started doing, and that was better. It was working a lot better at that point, but still was not exactly how I wanted to do. It was still a little bit brittle and required a lot of work when I added another dependency in to the mix. And so I kind of took a look at that, and I thought, why am I doing a new project editor page view model here every time? Maybe I could clean that up. And so I refactored that into a method, and this is starting to kind of get to something much, much better, to where I could just call in and just say, hey, just get this. Didn't have to supply all my services and things to it. I had stuff here that knew, hey, if I don't provide it in, then just run the default set up for it and plug that in. But whichever way, that way it made it really, really convenient. My test started looking a little bit better, and I ended up with something like this. So I'm still creating this mock individually, but now all I have to do is pass that one thing in, add a new dependency that this test doesn't care about, and I didn't have to come back and touch this test and add another object into it. It still works, and passes through, because all I have to do now is go back and edit this get project editor page view model method to default in the new parameter. And that was working pretty good. And I kind of followed this pattern for a little while. Moved this code, from one project to the next, and took this methodology, along the way. And there was a point where I was sitting there working on it, and I thought, there's got to be some better way I can do this. And somehow it just hit me. I was sitting there looking at this code, and I realized that, my app uses IOC to inject all these things. It's not, instantiating and setting all the dependencies every time, in all these methods like my tests are, and it works just fine. I kind of started thinking, well, what if, I can make tests that looked something more like this, so that now when I need to do, something special, all I'm doing is, resolving my my repository I want to test, running the test on it, and then calling some methods that allow me to check whether or not something was done. And so this kind of got me down, working down the line on this, to where I was starting to create some tests that looked a little bit more like this in action. So I would have my test class, and I would have some stuff here to do the creation for my objects, and come in, and I would say, hey, okay, whenever this is created, whenever an IORDER service is created and this routine runs for it, do my setup for it. And I would just register this method in, and then when I run my tests, everything's in here. There's one piece missing here. I would actually register the order view repository as well in this. But my code was much simpler. I had all my common stuff kind of defined. I could define this really kind of anywhere, but I had defined on my construction. I could set up everything my whole test class cared about, and when I run a test, I would be able to, just resolve the thing I need, run my tests, and then make this call, which underneath the scenes use the IOS the resolve type to get my type back out as a mock and run the stuff against it and return that to me. So I kind of started boiling this down to that. And as I got closer to this kind of functionality, I realized that I had something that I really kind of wanted to be able to share with people and wanted to make accessible out there. And if you don't start using my library, that's great. I'm not here to sell my library, but it's open source, and I'm perfectly happy if you go look at it and steal what you want from it or steal ideas from it. But I'm going to kind of show how the library works that I have created and how you can use it, and hopefully it'll be something that you can find useful. So I created the ease library, and you can find it at easelibrary.com. It's on NuGets out there, and it's had some growth over the last few years. It started out just with in-unit support for testing frameworks through some community support. We've now got XUnit and MS Test to it. So if you're using any three of those testing frameworks, this library has support for that. And the reason I showed the use of mock early on in this is because that's really what it's built on top of. So this is kind of a this opinionated library here, in that it has some certain opinions about how and what things should be done. And so in this case, we're using mock to do all of our mocking. We have IOC container support for both Unity and DryOC. Be interested in adding more IOC containers to it. These are just the ones that I actually was actively using. So they're the ones I've actually had development work done on it. And like I said, this all kind of started doing some Xamarin mobile app development. So I use Prisms there. So this actually has Prism Forms extensions in it to be able to help you do testing on those things. And I created this because I wanted to be able to make working with my mock dependencies and creating those tests around it something that was much easier to manage and work with. And today, if you go, get the ease library, put it in your test library project and start using it, it looks a little bit like this getting started. So real similar to what we were just looking at a minute ago. And I'll talk about how some of this works depending on how much time I have left. So I got about 10, 15 minutes here. First off, I'm inheriting the in-unit DryOC container base. So this is obviously it's going to be running on in-unit, and we're using DryOC for the container. There's actually base layers down below this that you can look at too. If you wanted to build your own test framework stuff, the DryOC and the Prism container pieces are built first down at a lower layer. So you can build another test framework layer on top of it to work with that. By the way, so we're bringing that in, and we're doing some setup here. So what I've done is I've made this so that all you have to do to be able to configure something when it's instantiated is supply a method to it that is an action that takes in a mock of whatever it is you want to be able to work with. So in this case, this is my iCart repository that I want to work with, and so I've created this action field here that I'm able to use for that. So, am I a constructor? I come in, I call this register mock type, and what this does under the scenes is it's using generics to figure everything out, but it knows that the type for this is going to be an iCart repository because of the signature of the method being passed in. And this method actually takes a function, as you can see, takes a function that has an action. And the reason that this is a function that returns an action is so that every test you run, when you actually initialize an object and ask for it out of the IOC container, this method is going to be ran. But we don't want to evaluate it now. We want to evaluate it at the time you run it, so that if you change it for a specific test, that gets picked up and used. If we just pass the method in right here, then whatever it's pointing to right now is what we would end up with, and a little less useful to have all your tests configured one way in your constructor. So we set the type up, and we call this register per test setup. And if you're using in-unit and you're familiar with in-unit, you know that you can do test setup code yourself in here, but to make this more consistent across all the different framework containers, we have a method that does this. And what this does is every time a new test is ran, it will run this method and all the things in it. So in this case, this is where we're configuring the method here is on iCart repository mock created. We're giving it our default implementation that we want to use, so that every test we have run, this is going to come back. It's going to be set up like this, so that when we ask for an iCart repository, this method is going to get ran, and only that method. It's an equal instead of a plus equal, so it's completely reset and everything. One advantage of this, actually, by the way, because it's an action, is that you can actually provide multiple things to it, multicast it, so you can have the default run and then add other things onto it. But we'll go over that a little bit. So then it comes down, and I just register the type I want to test with, and all these calls are just passing through down to our IOC container, the registrations on it, and then we're all set. And this is the method that runs for the mock creation, for the default mock creation. Comes in and just does some simple setup code on it here. So pretty straightforward for the setup. And what it does is lets my tests look a little bit something like this. So I have my test I want to do. I just come in, I resolve the object I want to test. I call whatever it is on the object I need to call to create the test situation that I want to go through. And then I call this validate mock. And so under the scenes, this, because we've registered this type, and it's using it controls the IOC container. When we do the validate mock, it goes and finds the instance of this, gets the instance out. And one of the nice things about mock is because MOQ is because it's all the type that it returns. You're able to convert from an instance object, so the dot object value, you can able to convert from that back to the mock type so that you can run the verify. So it does all that stuff under the scenes and then calls your Lambda here to come in, and you can then run your checks against it. So I can verify that the update product method was called on my repository when this went through. And then the nice part about this is that it is really easy to override behavior in your tests. So when you come in and you want to do something different than the normal, you can do a couple of things. You can, in this case, add another method to the delegate. So multicast it here. So this is still going to run the original default, and then after that, it's going to run this new delegate here to come in and do the other setup on it. So I want to change the behavior so that update product for any product coming in returns null, so it doesn't work right. And then I'm going to come down here, resolve my type, execute it, and then I'm going to validate that. In this case, my dialog service came up and gave me the failure functionality that I was looking for in that case. So all allows you to build upon it and overwrite it at the method level. And the nice part is that the next test it runs, all this is going to be gone. So this won't happen. The next test, it's going to be gone. This method will be back to the default that we set up here, right? So because this is going to run and reset the variable, so the next test that runs is set up for the default functionality. And like I said, this is built on top of Prism and Prism Forms, and so it has some built-in functionality for doing some of the things on there. If you're using view models in Forms and Prism Forms, you want initialize and things like that to be called for the navigation, so that your view models in a state where it's ready to be tested. And so we've added support for a lot of the navigation methods in here and everything. So like in this case, we're calling the return to products command, which should do a navigation go back in the Prism library and everything. So this verifies that happens, and some of that functionality is just kind of wrapped up. We could have done like in this case here, where we validate a specific mock. You could still do that for the navigation service that is used, but you don't have to, because we've set that up and done some of those navigation ones for you. But if you need to do something more granular, you can get straight to it. But we've kind of wrapped it up and made it easy, so you don't have to do all those things. You can just do some simple stuff like this. You also have some other navigating to pages and other things like that in there. So want to show a little bit of demo through some of those pieces. And yeah, Wesley, we probably could do something. The question out there is wondering if we could be able to abstract this further, having ease core and specific packages for like mock and fake it easy and stuff like that. Yeah, totally things that could be done out there. And if you'd like to get involved in this project, I'm happy to accept contributors to it and work with you. So I was pretty excited last year when I had my first, or actually earlier this year, it's been a long year, when I had my first actual contributor to the project. was really pretty cool. This is something I did mostly so that I could use it, and hoping it would be useful for other people. But yeah, absolutely, totally open to ways that this can be extended and made more usable for more people, as long as it doesn't get harder for me to use. So, um, so this is kind of what we've been looking at. There, I've got just some simple stuff set up in this. My order service, my interfaces for things, and then my actual tests that I want to run. And so this is what I talked about earlier. If you're using in unit, which is what I use most of the time, that's me, then you know that you can add the setup attribute, and this will be ran on all test classes. So underneath the scenes in my base class I've created, this is configured, and inside of the one that's down there, it calls this register per test setup for you to run all these routines. You could do all this code right here, but I've done it this way just for consistency, because on some of the other libraries, they don't do the same way. Especially MS Test is a little bit more complicated the way that it does some of those things. I've tried to create a way where this is, if you switched frameworks, it would be, minimal effort on the ease library anyway to make the changes. It'd be just the effort of changing your unit tests themselves on it. But we're coming in, we're registering our types here, doing our setup, and so we can do various different things here. These are pretty straightforward. We're resolving our type, and we're just going to assert that we got one order from this. If we go look at our setup and everything, we see that we've returning the pieces out of it that we want to have. And so this has one order in it. I'm not doing anything special here. In this case, if any int comes in, I'm returning something. So I'm just making sure that, hey, I got the callback from that. And the reason for that is because what I really want to do is I want to make sure that, my repository was actually called, less about what came out of it, but just that it was actually called and used in those cases. So, and I can also do things like in this particular test here, I'm overwriting it so that if another ID is called, it returns no items, so I can actually test like an order that's not there, that I'm reacting to that properly out of it. So if I run this, I've got my unit tests all running. See everything's passing down here. Interesting things you can do is, because of the way that all this worked, to show that I'm still running the previous pieces on this. If I change this to a 1 and run it, so this is only affecting ID2. Obviously, you can see that I had a failure because it expected 0, but actually got something back in my test. So because 1 is still set up, still be configured, I can actually break it if I remove the plus equals and just totally reset it and everything. Then it actually works in this case because I actually got null back and everything, but not because I was returning that, but because of the way the setup was done. So change that back. Don't have time to get into the underpinnings of this and how all these things work, but you can definitely take a look at, let me find my window here. Go. So ease library is kind of the landing point for it. This is open source. Everything's out there. You can get straight to the source on GitHub and go through it. I've got samples out here for Xamarin Forms, and there's some samples in here on how to use it, but here's the general setup of everything that's in it. Here's the resources on those. So yeah, it's out there. Definitely interested in people who would be interested in contributing to it. I've currently, like I said, it has support for Unity and dry IOC, and inside of that it has support for in-unit, X-unit, and MS Test. And if you like to add some other support to it, I've actually got a PR out there right now I need to go take a look at. If you'd like to add any support, functionality, or even just have ideas, I would love to see them be put out as suggestions of ways we could improve it. This has really been built around my use and a couple other people's use, but definitely looking for feedback on how other people do their unit testing and how it can help you in it as well. So that's what I've got. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, hit them over here in the chat, and I guess we can go to the other room if we need to follow up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Duane. We're going to just wait a few seconds to see if we have any questions from the conference viewers. Other than that, I am going to pass on the link over here as well, which you can find it on the main PineApp page where you can see all the stages. There's a little box that says chat with the speaker after each session. You can click on there and meet Duane over there. So that's all from me and Nirvana stage, and see you later, I guess. Thanks, Duane, again.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Rock on.